This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for June 12th through the 18th. On this week's show, we discuss how the greatest song ever written came together, how the template for rock festivals came together, and we wish a happy birthday to the man who helped to write Come Together. In 1965, Bob Dylan was stuck in a rut and going through some musical doubts. His mantle as new musical hero was beginning to weigh heavily on him, so much so that he was thinking about quitting the industry. He decided that the best way to work through all of this was to start writing and recording new music. He threw all of his thoughts and feelings down on paper, and he ended up with a 10-page meandering poem, which he then condensed down and tidied up into song form. He experimented a lot with the music, including different time signatures, until he finally settled on using a regular rock beat. Then, he recorded the song over 2 days, on June 15th through the 16th in 1965 at Columbia Records Studio A at 799 7th Avenue between 51st Street and 52nd Street in New York City. Dylan sang, played guitar and harmonica. Mike Bloomfield played guitar. Bobby Gregg played drums. Paul Griffin played piano. Joe Macho Jr. played bass guitar. Yes, Joe Macho Jr. is his real name. Folk musician Bruce Langhorne played tambourine, and yes, that does make him Bob's Mr. Tambourine Man. And the legendary Al Cooper played the very recognizable organ part in the beginning of the song. Al, for the record, also did the famous French horn part on the Rolling Stones classic You Can't Always Get What You Want. Tom Wilson was the producer, but it would be the last thing that he would work with Dylan on. When he was done with the song, there was just one problem. The song clocked in at over 6 minutes long. Originally, his record company refused to release it, saying that the length of the song made it not radio-friendly, quote-unquote. Dylan's management got around that by slipping a copy of the full version of the song to an influential nightclub DJ. The response to the song was overwhelming, and soon, radio stations wanted copies of the new Dylan song that they had heard about. Dylan's record company still wasn't convinced, so they cut the song in half on the released singles, the first half on the A-side and the latter half on the B-side. After a while, they finally relented and released the full version on one side. Good decision on their part, as the song became a huge hit. It went to number 2 on the Billboard singles chart, the Beatles' Help being the song that blocked his way to the number 1 spot. Little did Dylan know just how much of an influence his song would turn out to have, including everyone from Jimi Hendrix to Bruce Springsteen. These days, according to most critics, the song is considered the greatest song ever written and recorded in the rock era. His epic 10-page poem, written about the pressures of life and other things, Like a Rolling Stone, recorded on June 15th and the 16th in 1965. Now, let us discuss the prototype of how you put a music festival together. In April of 1967, Mamas and the Papas member John Phillips had an idea to put on a music festival. He had seen how the Monterey Jazz Festival and the Big Sur Folk Festival were run and respected, and he wanted that for rock music. He got together with record producer Lou Adler and a couple other guys and decided to hold a 3-day music festival at the Monterey County Fairgrounds in California. The festival was put together in about 7 weeks and was different for a few reasons. First, most of the acts played for free, as the ticket box office was going to charity. The only exceptions to that rule were that of Country Joe and the Fish and Ravi Shankar. Second, everyone on the staff was trained and security was plentiful. The staff was even trained on how to take care of concert goers who had taken too many drugs or were on bad LSD trips. There were also some historical reasons why this festival is still talked about to this very day. One is that it is considered the first event in the Summer of Love that your parents and grandparents like to glowingly talk to you about. Technically, the first rock festival happened a week before then, but that festival didn't have earth-shattering, history-making performances like Monterey did, so Monterey gets the nod as the beginning of the Summer of Love. It's all in the marketing sometimes. The big reason why people still talk about this festival is because of who became famous after it. The festival, for instance, introduced America to Janis Joplin when she performed with Big Brother and the Holding Company. It also made Otis Redding into a huge star. It let people get to know Ravi Shankar, and The Who also made their mark in America there. The big act that is synonymous with the festival, however, is Jimi Hendrix. Hendrix made his American debut there after taking England by storm. His performance is legendary, everything from spinning his guitar to playing the guitar with his teeth to lighting his guitar on fire and praying to it. Life was never the same for the greatest guitarist who ever lived after that, and when people say the phrase Jimmy plays Monterey, you know exactly what they're talking about. The festival was split up into 5 separate concerts. There was a Friday evening block, followed by Saturday and Sunday afternoon and evening blocks. You could buy tickets for each concert or get a full weekend pass. The venue only had 5,850 seats, but organizers sold standing room only tickets, which brought daily attendance to anywhere between 7,000 to 10,000 people. You could also get tickets that got you into the fairgrounds, but not into the performance area, which wasn't too bad because you could still hear the concert. It was estimated that up to 90,000 people attended the festival over 3 days. The venue was at 100% capacity for every concert day except for one, which we will talk about in a little while. Friday the 16th was an evening block. It started with the Association, followed by the Paupers, Lou Rawls, Beverly, Johnny Rivers, Eric Burdon and the Animals, with Simon and Garfunkel closing out the night. Saturday afternoon's concert started with Canned Heat, then the first appearance of Big Brother and the Holding Company with Janis Joplin. Country Joe and the Fish followed Big Brother, then musician Al Kooper played a couple of songs before the Butterfield Blues Band played their set. They were followed by Quicksilver Messenger Service, the Steve Miller Band, with the group The Electric Flag finishing off the day session. Saturday night show started with Moby Grape and then Hugh Masekela, the Byrds, with Hugh Masekela joining them on the song So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star, Laura Nyro, Jefferson Airplane, Booker T and the MGs, and finishing with the electrifying performance of Otis Redding. It rained Sunday morning, which kept the attendance for the Sunday afternoon concert down. Despite the bad weather, though, capacity was at 80% to see the only afternoon performer that day, Ravi Shankar, who played 6 songs. Sunday night had some iconic performances. The concert started with the Blues Project, then Big Brother and the Holding Company played for the second time that weekend, as organizers wanted them back again so that they could record their performance for a concert film that was being done. Plus, people had gotten word about how amazing Janis Joplin was in the first performance that the public wanted to see them yet again. Buffalo Springfield played without Neil Young, who had just quit the band. The Who made their mark with their American Coming Out Party, and then the Grateful Dead played their set. The Jimi Hendrix Experience played their iconic set, complete with guitar burning, of course. And the night finished up with the Mamas and the Papas, since John Phillips was the one putting on the festival, with Scott McKenzie playing with them for the last couple of songs. Overall, the festival was a huge success. It set the template for other festivals after that, from how to train staff to how to promote a festival to setting the festivals up as a 3-day event to ticket price scaling. Top ticket price, by the way, was $6.50, which works out to $47 in today's money when you figure in inflation. Try getting into a festival for $47 these days. That ain't happening. The Fire and Pemberton Festival organizers should have studied how Monterey was run. Maybe they wouldn't have gotten into so much trouble. The Monterey Pop Music Festival took place from June 16th through the 18th in 1967. Honorable mention to that past story. On that very same weekend, June 16th through the 18th in 1967, the very first Montreux Jazz Festival took place. Here's a few other honorable mentions for you. On June 15, 1967, Peter Green left John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. He next formed Fleetwood Mac with drummer Mick Fleetwood. Last week, we briefly discussed how June 7th was important to the life of actor John Travolta, specifically because that was the date in 1972 that the musical Grease made its on-Broadway debut at the Broadhurst Theater. Now, why is that important to him? Simple. Because on June 16th, 1978, the movie that was based on that musical premiered in movie theaters and starred John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John. And that movie, along with the movies Saturday Night Fever and Urban Cowboy, earned John Travolta a lot of accolades and turned him into the hottest actor, at least for a few years. On June 16, 1980, the musical movie The Blues Brothers, based on the Saturday Night Live sketch of the same name and starring John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd, held its premiere in Chicago, Illinois, where most of the movie took place. Back around 2011 or so, Lin-Manuel Miranda was coming off of a very successful production that he created called In the Heights. The show had gone on to be nominated for 13 Tony Awards, winning 4 of them. Of course, when faced with such a greatly successful Broadway show, you're left wondering, how do you possibly top that? When Lin-Manuel was going on vacation, he picked up a biography in the airport that was written by Ron Chernow called Alexander Hamilton. For some reason known only to creatives like us whose brains work like this, after reading a few chapters, he started picturing Hamilton's life as a musical, and he would give the play and the music a hip-hop soundtrack because, seriously, who wouldn't? I mean, really, it's the Founding Father. Why wouldn't hip-hop go with that? Yeah. Right around that time, then President Obama was doing an evening of poetry at the White House. He invited Lin-Manuel to perform parts of In the Heights. He instead decided to road test parts of his Hamilton project because who would not want to try something brand spanking new in front of the President of the United States and a national audience? No pressure. None whatsoever. Turns out his gamble paid off. The response was overwhelmingly positive, so much so that he decided to continue with the project and flush it out some more. And in 2013, he did a workshop where he had most of Hamilton worked out by then. That went pretty well, so he finished the musical and started an off-Broadway run. He then moved the production to Broadway, where it ran in previews for what seemed like forever, drawing huge word of mouth, and on August 6, 2015, after taking in almost $30 million in ticket sales during the preview performances alone, Hamilton officially opened on Broadway. To say that the response was positive would be the understatement of the century. Hamilton broke box office records and has sold out so many performances that even with Lin-Manuel no longer there, I still don't think that you can get a ticket. It also tied the Broadway production, The Producers, for the record for the most Tony Award wins, winning 11 out of 13 nominations on June 12th, 2016. The only reason why it didn't win all 13 nominations was that 2 of the Hamilton actors were going up against each other in 2 different categories, so they both couldn't win. So there you go. As far as its effect on pop culture and history goes, well, Hamilton did a lot. First, it helped to introduce a couple of generations to a lesser-known member of the Founding Fathers to go along with, of course, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, etc., etc. It also made him so popular that when it came time to redesign the $10 bill, he was left on it. He was supposedly going to get kicked off of the money. Plus, it helped to expand hip-hop to the Broadway audience and Broadway to the hip-hop audience. So, nice melding of cultures there. The musical phenomenon Hamilton crushing the competition at the Tony Awards on June 12th, 2016. Next, unless you're a fan of early 1960s R&B and easy listening music, then the name Adam Wade probably doesn't come to mind. Adam was one of those artists who never received his flowers in his later years, having now passed away on July 7, 2022 at the age of 87 from Parkinson's disease. We're going to give him his props this week, though. Not necessarily for his music, which was actually pretty good, but for something else that was extremely rare. Adam was a lab assistant for Dr. Jonas Salk when Dr. Salk was conducting his polio vaccine experiments. The siren call of entertainment sounded, so Adam left to go make his mark in the world for something other than helping to save millions of lives through a vaccine. Listen, a guy's got to have other dreams. What can I tell you? Adam started out in entertainment as an easy listening type of singer whose style was more along the lines of, let's say, Johnny Mathis or maybe his idol Nat King Cole. He racked up 3 top 5 singles in 1961, Take Good Care of Her, As If I Didn't Know, and Writings on the Wall. His last hit was 1965's Crying in the Chapel. He released 6 albums in the 1960s before going into acting in the 1970s. And then he put out an album in 1977 before finishing his career doing stage productions like the 2008 touring production of The Color Purple. For as solid an entertainment career as he had, we are mentioning him this week for this particular feat. In 1975, a television game show was developed called Musical Chairs. This was an interesting game show. There was a 3-round format where a song would start to be sung, and wherever the song ended, the contestant would have to give the next line in the song out of 3 choices that were given. The show also had guest artists performing some of the songs, like Sister Sledge and the Spinners. It was developed for CBS television by rock music producer and promoter Don Kirshner and his partner Jerome Schnurr, and was filmed at the Ed Sullivan Theater on Broadway in New York City. On June 16, 1975, the show premiered at the 4 p.m. slot, taking over for the game show Tattletales, which had moved to a morning slot. The show ran until October 31st, 1975. The host was Adam Wade. And in an era where you found the vast majority of television roles for black people being on sitcoms where you dealt with the usual stereotypes like The Maid, etc., along with music variety shows if you were a well-known artist like, say, the Jacksons, or the occasional drama in a supporting role as the best friend or a co-worker, what Adam did was history-making, because he became the first black person to host a daytime television game show. Adam paved the way for people like Aisha Tyler, Wayne Brady, and a host of others. That progress would not come easy, as it would take a while before another black person got a chance to host a game show. Entertainer Adam Wade becoming the first black person to host a TV game show when the television game show Musical Chairs premiered on CBS television on June 16, 1975. Before we continue, we'd like to tell you about the Music History Today podcast, where we go over the events that happened on that particular day in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops every single day, including weekends, on this podcast network. Now, back to the Music History In-Depth podcast. It is time for some passings and also some birthdays, but since we spoke about the first 2 people when these icons were born, we will briefly talk about them again. First up, Ella Fitzgerald, who was born on April 25, 1917 in Virginia. Ella performed at her first amateur hour at the legendary Apollo Theater in New York City on November 21st, 1934, at the age of 17. At the time, Ella was slated to dance. However, there was another dance act called the Edwards Sisters who were really good. Ella was intimidated by them, so instead of dancing, she sang 2 songs. She won amateur night that night, and a legendary singing career was born. First prize that night was $25. That's $578.97 in today's money. After her win at the Apollo, her career skyrocketed. She joined the Chick Webb Orchestra, rising to become their lead vocalist. The band's success brought Fitzgerald national recognition, and her signature song, A Tisket a Tasket, became a classic. As Fitzgerald carved her own path, she collaborated with jazz legends like Duke Ellington, Count Basie, and Dizzy Gillespie. Throughout her extremely impressive career, she won 14 Grammy Awards and sold over 40 million albums, solidifying her place as a musical icon. She also won a Presidential Medal of Freedom and a National Medal of the Arts. The First Lady of Song, the Queen of Jazz, Miss Ella Fitzgerald, passed away from a stroke on June 16, 1996, at the age of 78. This man was born on May 30th, 1909. He was the 9th out of 12 kids. His father came from Poland and his mother came from Lithuania. They met in Baltimore, moved to Chicago, Illinois, where our band leader was born. Their neighborhood was in the ghetto in the Maxwell Street neighborhood, and although the family didn't have any money, the father somehow managed to pay for his kids' music lessons as the kid was becoming interested in music. While he was in Chicago, he learned from artists such as Johnny Dodds and Jimmy Noon. By the time he was 14, he was already playing professionally. His father, unfortunately, would not live to see his success. He passed away tragically in an accident when the kid was 17 years old. After that, the kid moved to New York City and became a very successful session musician. After a number of years, he got a band of his own together, and he started working the supper clubs, and he got on a radio show on NBC called Let's Dance. And there, the band started playing a new style of music that was catching on called swing music. The radio show was popular enough, but became a victim of a strike and was canceled right in the middle of the Great Depression. Here is where history takes that weird, wonderful turn sometimes. The radio show lineup was such that the kids' band was on late in the evenings, sometimes after midnight, at least on the East Coast. But on the East Coast, that meant that most people had not heard this new style of music or of the band itself. However, on the West Coast, the radio show was live. It wasn't taped, which meant that people were listening around 9 in the evening to the show. And it was there that the band and swing music took hold. The band heard that kids on the West Coast had invented dances to do with their music, so they scraped some money together and went on tour on the West Coast. And little by little, the music and the dancing went from the West Coast to the East Coast and began to catch on. And the rest is history. The music and the dancing became a cultural phenomenon known as swing music, and its Pied Piper, clarinetist, and bandleader, the Kid, Benny Goodman, became the catalyst. The King of Swing, swing music impresario and clarinetist, Mr. Benny Goodman, passed away on June 13th, 1986, at the age of 77. Next, Tupac Shakur. The name commands respect, vilification, admiration, contempt. He was the greatest rapper of all time, or the second greatest behind Biggie, all of the above depending on which side of the East Coast-West Coast rivalry you sit on. For my money, I give the edge to Pac because of his entire body of work. Unfortunately, while Pac consistently put out quality albums, Biggie never got a chance to, having been killed while in the process of doing work for his second album. Therefore, the edge goes to Pac. My opinion. Just saying. Moving on. Ever since Tupac was born in 1971 in East Harlem, New York, he couldn't help but become involved in social and political issues. A lot of his family were involved in one way or another with the Black Liberation Army. In fact, Pac's stepfather was on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list for a few years. The family moved out of Harlem to Baltimore, Maryland in 1986. When he went to the Baltimore School for the Arts, a new world opened up for him. He studied acting, ballet, jazz, and poetry. He also became involved in the Young Communist League and developed a lifelong friendship with fellow student Jada Pinkett Smith. A couple of years later, the family moved to California. Pac started going to poetry classes that were held by poet Layla Steinberg. Layla was involved in putting on a concert that had Tupac's group at the time, Strictly Dope. In attendance was Atron Gregory, who signed Tupac as a backup dancer with the hip-hop group Digital Underground. He ended up rapping on Digital Underground's song, Same Song. In 1991, he released his debut album, Tupacalypse Now. The songs that came off of that album were Brenda's Got a Baby and Trapped. For the next 5 years, Tupac released 4 more albums. The vast majority of his songs dealt with social issues such as police brutality, poverty, domestic violence, and such. And some of his biggest hits were California Love with Dr. Dre, 2 of America's Most Wanted with Snoop Dogg, I Get Around, Keep Your Head Up, Dear Mama, How Do You Like It with Casey and JoJo of the group Jodeci, and I Ain't Mad at You. Of course, you can't mention Tupac without thinking about the bad that went along with the good. There were his sexual assault charges and assaulting director Alan Hughes, which put him in jail a few times. And then there was that beef with Biggie. There was the attempt on his life outside of a New York City radio station. There was his lawsuit against the city of Oakland, California, after getting beaten up by 2 Oakland cops for jaywalking, of all things. During one of his arrests for sexual assault, bail was set at $1.4 million. Tupac's savior in the case would be someone who was there when Tupac met his tragic end, Suge Knight. Suge and Pac worked out a deal. In exchange for Suge posting Pac's bail, Pac would record 3 albums for Death Row Records. Pac's first 2 albums in the deal were made into a 28-song double album, All Eyes on Me. What most people don't realize is that all of the songs were recorded in 2 weeks, between October 13th through the 27th, 1995. That is a staggering amount of work in 2 weeks for what turned out to be one of the greatest hip-hop albums ever made. The album was produced primarily by Johnny J. and Daz Dillinger. Dr. Dre would help out on a couple of songs. The album had guest spots from Dre, Snoop Dogg, George Clinton, Nate Dogg, Method Man, Redman, and many others. The album, when released on February 13, 1996, became the first album to hit number 1 on the Billboard Albums chart from an artist who was in prison at that point and would go on to sell over 10 million certified copies in America. The album had the mega hits California Love with Dr. Dre, 2 of America's Most Wanted with Snoop Dogg, and How Do You Like It with Casey and JoJo from Jodeci. The final song released from the album, I Ain't Mad at You, would be released after this next and final event. On the night of September 7th, 1996, Quincy Jones and actress Peggy Lipton's daughter, Kadeta Jones, waited for Tupac in a Las Vegas hotel room. Kadeta was Tupac's fiancée at the time. Tupac and his record label owner, Suge Knight, were at the Mike Tyson heavyweight boxing match. After the match, as they walked through the MGM Grand Hotel, someone in their entourage spotted a member of the Crips street gang. A fight broke out in the hotel. Pac and Knight left the hotel and drove off and headed towards the Club 662, which was owned by Suge. They were stopped by the cops for not having license plates on the car, as Suge was the one who was driving. They were later let go without a ticket, as the plates were in the trunk of the car. After a minute or two, they stopped at a stoplight at the corner of East Flamingo Road and Covell Lane. And as they waited for the light to turn green, A white Cadillac pulled up next to them. Shots were fired from the Cadillac, hitting Tupac in the chest, leg, and arm. Suge was hit by shrapnel, but Pac was fatally killed. Tupac was pronounced dead on September 13th from his gunshot wounds. His alleged killer was finally arrested nearly 30 years later. Regardless, what an amazing career. One of the greatest rappers to ever live. Happy birthday to Tupac, albeit a heavenly one, on June 16th, 1971. This next birthday is also one of the biggest artists of all time. The vast majority of his life is completely documented, probably over-documented, to be honest with you, so I will just briefly hit upon his childhood and leave it at that. James was born on June 18, 1942. His mom was a nurse. In fact, James was born in the same hospital that his mother worked in. Since it was the middle of World War II, his father was a volunteer firefighter and missed his son's birth. James's brother was born a couple of years later. James started school in one place, but because of overcrowding, he went to another school. And one day, while on the school bus, he met a kid who would eventually help him change the world. They became good friends and would remain so until one of them ended up passing away. Along with being a volunteer firefighter, James's dad played trumpet and piano. James's dad, in fact, gave James a trumpet for his birthday. James, however, was more interested in a guitar, as rock and roll was just beginning to make its mark, so he traded in the trumpet and learned to play the guitar. One day, James went to a concert and got into a conversation with a member of one of the bands. The two of them, of course, became friends. Then James was invited to join the band. The band would break up, but James and his friend decided to form a new band. The new band went through a few member changes, including getting James's earlier mentioned friend to play guitar, changing drummers, playing gigs in a different country, and playing their hometown gig where a record store manager found them. The manager became their manager and had them work with a really good producer. That producer, Sir George Martin, would help the manager, Brian Epstein, craft the group with James, his band friend John Lennon, his earlier bus friend George Harrison, and their new drummer Ringo Starr into the Beatles. So, happy birthday to James, who actually goes by his middle name, Paul. Sir Paul McCartney, born on June 18th, 1942. Finally, let us delve into some albums. First off, some honorable mentions, and we'll start with 4 debut albums. On June 15, 1979, Joy Division released their debut album, Unknown Pleasures. It was also the only one that was released while lead singer Ian Curtis was still alive. On June 13, 1988, Paula Abdul released her debut album, Forever Your Girl, which became one of the biggest selling albums of the late 1980s and early 1990s. June 15, 1989, saw 2 debut albums. Nirvana released their indie label debut, Bleach, and based on that album, they got a major record label deal and released their album, Nevermind. On that same exact day, The Offspring released their debut album, but they only released it on vinyl, not on cassette, not on CD at that point. There was one iconic album that was released this week in music history. Some places say that this particular album was released on June 6, 1972. However, evidence came to light in 2015 from the record label Head that said that the official release date was actually June 16th, 1972. He was born on January 8th, 1947. Growing up, he became hooked on rock and roll, specifically Elvis Presley, the man who he also shares a birthday with. He also developed a fondness for theatrical performances, a characteristic that would help to shape his career. He started out recording under his own name while he was a member of a group called Davy Jones with his King Bees in 1963 until January 14, 1966, when he released the single Can't Stop Thinking About Me under his new name, David Bowie. He took the name Bowie from the popular Bowie knife. The reason why he changed his last name was so that he would not be confused with another artist who was gaining popularity on a TV show. That artist would be the legendary Mr. Davy Jones, who played on the TV show The Monkees. In June of 1969, David was on the outs with his record label. His first album was a complete flop, and he was looking for a new label. His manager negotiated a one-record deal with another label, so he went into the studio. In June of 1969, specifically June 22nd, 1969, he recorded a reworked version of a song that he had recorded that year for a promotional film. The song was inspired by another film called 2001: A Space Odyssey. The song was released on July 11, 1969. The song's timing was intentional. At that time, the Apollo space missions were huge news. Apollo 11 had taken off on its history-making voyage to the moon. The song was not released until after the mission, since it told the story about an astronaut who had lost his way during a space mission. Once the song was released, it became a big hit in England, and Bowie finally found his foot in the door in the music industry. The astronaut who was lost on the song's mission, Major Tom, was found in the 1980s in a sequel of sorts to the song Major Tom Coming Home by Peter Schilling. Bowie's song, Space Oddity, is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as one of the 500 songs that helped to shape rock and roll. Though he finally had a hit on his hands in 1969, it wasn't until 1972 that he took glam rock by the throat and made it his own by creating a character named Ziggy Stardust. It all started in early 1971 when Bowie came back from doing a promotional tour in the United States, and while he was stateside, he grew to love different genres of American music and wanted to incorporate some into his new music. He got to work writing new songs in Haddon Hall in England, and he came up with a few dozen of them. Some of these songs were recorded with his side project band that he had for a hot minute called Arnold Corns back in 1971, but then he reworked these songs for his next couple of albums. Finally, he was ready to get to work on the next two albums, which he essentially did back-to-back because his new band didn't think the material for only one album was strong enough to tour on. They were probably right. He started recording Hunky Dory in June of 1971 with his new band that featured Mick Ronson on electric guitar, Trevor Bolder on bass, and Mick Woodmansey on drums, with Bowie playing acoustic guitar. Ken Scott, who worked on a couple of Bowie albums as an engineer, was tapped to produce all of the sessions that became Hunky and Ziggy. There were a couple of musicians who played in the sessions as well. Rick Wakeman, for instance, played harpsichord on It Ain't Easy and was actually offered a permanent spot in the band. However, he turned it down in favor of joining another band. Don't worry, it worked out okay for Rick, because that band that he joined was the progressive rock group Yes. They did okay. The other musician who played was technically a singer, vocalist Dana Gillespie, who sang on It Ain't Easy. In 1971, David Bowie finished his record contract with Mercury Records, which led to other record companies wanting to sign him. Bowie's manager took the songs that were ready for Hunky Dory around to the record labels and also to RCA Records, thanks to their label head, Dennis Katz, who signed him to a record deal. The move didn't start out too well, though. When RCA released Hunky Dory on December 17, 1971, it did well critically, but not commercially. And that was mainly because of poor promotion on the label's part. Turns out, they didn't really know how to position the album because there were rumors that Bowie was going to change his persona. Boy, did he, and in a huge way. Work began on Ziggy Stardust officially on July 9, 1971, when they recorded a cover of Ron Davies' song It Ain't Easy. Unlike the way things had been done before, say the last 50 years or so, Bowie and the band recorded everything live, with a few days of rehearsals beforehand to work the different songs out. Producer Ken Scott said that Bowie's vocals were nailed pretty tight on the first take of every song. Communication between the band members and Bowie was much better by this point, as Bowie had become very rude and dismissive of some of the band's input, especially Mick Ronson, who never knew what Bowie wanted for his guitar solos until he finally had a meeting of the minds with Bowie. That group, now called the Spiders from Mars, recorded in earnest in November and December of 1971, then took a holiday break, and then got back to work in the first week of January and finished the album on February 4th. The songs that made the album, in order, were 5 Years, Soul Love, Moon Age Daydream, Starman, which was put on after the record label said the usual record label line, "We don't hear a single on the album." It also had It Ain't Easy, Lady Stardust, Star, Hang On to Yourself, Ziggy Stardust, Suffragette City, and Rock and Roll Suicide. 11 songs in total. Contrary to popular belief, Ziggy Stardust did not start out as a concept album or a rock opera. The songs had been written and recorded by the time the thought had occurred to anybody. Once they took a listen to the songs, though, they decided to put the songs in order and then came up with the concept and a story to go along with them. A happy accident or a subconscious one, depending on how you look at things, I guess. The concept that they came up with was about an androgynous bisexual alien named Ziggy Stardust, who came to Earth to warn the people about the apocalypse. At first, the people loved him, but then Ziggy fell into the trap of believing his own BS, and his ego takes over, which led to people hating him, hence the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust. Not a bad concept, actually. Kind of reminds me of a tech entrepreneur. Never mind, let's not talk about Elon. Anyway, Bowie based Ziggy on an actual guy. One day, Bowie met singer Vince Taylor of Vince Taylor and the Playboys while Vince was in the middle of having a mental breakdown where he thought he was a god and an alien. You know, much like tech entrepreneurs. I kid. Sort of. Elon. Anyway, according to biographers, Bowie was also influenced by Iggy Pop, Lou Reed, and Mark Bolan. Woodmansey said that he also used Jimi Hendrix and the band King Crimson as influences. As far as the Stardust name, legend has it that it came from the song Stardust by Hoagy Carmichael, while Ziggy came from the name of a tailor store that he used to pass by all the time. The official story for the album is as follows, quote, "The album begins with 5 years. A news broadcast reveals that the Earth only has 5 years left before it gets destroyed by an impending apocalyptic disaster. The first 2 verses are from the point of view of a child hearing this news for the first time and going numb as it sinks in. The listener is addressed directly by the 3rd verse, while the character of Ziggy Stardust is introduced indirectly. Afterwards, the listener hears the point of view of numerous characters dealing with love before the impending disaster, that would be the song Soul Love. Ziggy directly introduces himself in Moon Age Daydream. Starman sees Ziggy bringing a message of hope to Earth's youth through the radio. Lady Stardust presents an unfinished tale with what Doggett states as, quote, "no hint at a denouncement beyond a vague air of melancholy," end quote. Ziggy is recalled by the audience using both he and she pronouns, showing a lack of gender distinction. Ziggy then looks at himself through a mirror, pondering what it would be like to make it, quote, as a rock and roll star, end quote, and if it would all be worthwhile. That would be the song Star. In Hang On to Yourself, Ziggy is put in front of the crowd. The track emphasizes the metaphor that rock music goes from sex to fulfillment and back to sex again. Ziggy's plans to abandon the sexual climax for a chance at stardom, which ultimately leads to his downfall. Ziggy Stardust is the central piece of the narrative, presenting a complete birth-to-death chronology of Ziggy. He is described as a, quote, well-hung, snow-white tanned, left-hand guitar-playing man, end quote, who rises to fame with his backup band, the Spiders from Mars, but he lets his ego get control of him, effectively alienating his fans and losing his bandmates. Unlike Lady Stardust, Ziggy Stardust shows the character's rise and fall in a very human manner. O'Leary writes that the song's narrator is not definitive. It could be an audience member retrospectively discussing Ziggy. It could be one of the Spiders, or even the, quote, disassociated memories of Ziggy himself. After his fall from grace, Ziggy is described by Peg as, quote, a hollow figure caught in the headlights of braking cars as he stumbles across the road. And rather than dying in blood, Ziggy cries to the audience, this would be rock and roll suicide, requesting that they, quote, give him their hands, because they are wonderful, before perishing on stage. The famous album photos, by the way, those were shot on January 13, 1972 in photographer Brian Ward's studio on Hedden Street, just off of Regent Street in London, England. Ward wanted to capture the band outside before the sun went completely down, but it was cold outside. I mean, after all, it was January. So most of the band stayed indoors. Bowie, who had a flu, was a trooper, and he went out anyway and stood in front of what was then K West Furrier's and what is now actually a restaurant. The back cover was shot around the corner at a red box phone booth. A replica of the booth still stands, and the entire area is now a tourist trap with people leaving notes for Bowie. I actually visited that during my last trip to England earlier in February of 2025. The photos were originally done in monochrome, and then they were retouched in color, which is why they look the way that they do. On June 16, 1972, the album The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars was released in the United Kingdom. It was preceded on April 12th by the double A-side release of Starman and Suffragette City. Another event that preceded both releases that was either purposely or coincidentally timed was an article that came out in which David Bowie came out as being gay. That article prepped the public for his Ziggy persona and turned Bowie into a gay icon, with one publication calling Bowie, quote, a potent spokesman for gay rock, end quote. Whether it was a coincidence or an orchestrated move by his manager, it did help to give Bowie free publicity for both the album and the upcoming tour. Starman performed well enough on the British pop charts to earn Bowie a spot on the very influential British television music show Top of the Pops. On July 5, 1972, Bowie performed Starman in his full Ziggy outfit with spiky red hair, astronaut boots, and a rainbow-colored jumpsuit. During the performance, David put his arm around Mick Ronson's shoulder. That one simple act, much like when white singer Lulu put her arm around black entertainer Harry Belafonte's arm while singing a duet together on her TV show less than a decade earlier, sent the British media into an uproar. However, kids loved it. What it was with the British media always getting huffy when someone touched a person of the same sex or a different race is beyond me, but, you know, what are you going to do? After that performance, Starman went from being a song that bubbled in the upper 40s on the charts straight into the top 10. The album started to do relatively well, but was never a humongous seller when it first came out. That actually has happened over the decades, as it slowly but surely has now sold 7.5 million copies, making it Bowie's second best-selling album after Let's Dance. The downfall, if you will, for Ziggy Stardust came on tour. Bowie toured the United Kingdom, America, and Japan from January 1972 to early July 1973, with breaks in between the legs of the tours. Bowie was into method acting, which for those not in the know is when you don't break your character, even when the cameras stop rolling. And that unfortunately meant that Bowie was Ziggy wherever he went. And according to Bowie, it got to the point where he questioned his own sanity. During the breaks, he and the band worked on the next album and also a new persona. That album was Aladdin Sane, as in a lad insane, which was edgier and more aggressive due to Bowie's declining grasp on his own sanity. The song The Gene Genie was the big hit off of that album. And then finally, on July 3rd, 1973, during his final tour performance at the Hammersmith Odeon in London, England, David Bowie announced to the crowd that he was killing off Ziggy Stardust and moving on. The only person who knew that he was going to break up the band was Mick Ronson. That final performance was captured and made into a documentary and concert film, Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. And then, that was it. Aladdin Sane became the final album released with the Spiders from Mars, and then Bowie went on to create amazing music until his death in January of 2016, and Ziggy Stardust was killed on July 3rd, 1973 in London, England. Ziggy played guitar. The release of David Bowie's iconic album, one of the greatest albums ever made, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, released in the United Kingdom on June 16th, 1972. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for June 12th through the 18th. Thank you very, very much for listening and or watching if you are watching this on YouTube or Spotify.